place you do not know. Lech ilach, on your journey I will bless you, and you shall be a blessing. You shall be a blessing.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so let me officially start our presentation today. Our speaker today is Eldad Golan, and as you already know, he will be talking about wildlife in the desert. And speaking for myself, I'm looking forward to this presentation because Eldad is not just a speaker, not just a guide, but he's also an amazing photographer. And he is a bird watcher, and he is an ornithologist, and he is a desert specialist, and he lives in En-Gedi, which is, as you might know, is located on a little hill just above the west coast of the Dead Sea, right in the middle of the east side of the Judean Desert. And it is maybe the best kibbutz in Israel, and that's where he lives. Now, as you know, donations are always appreciated, and I would say that in this case, it is even more appreciated than usual because all of us, the tour guide, we were all influenced by the pandemic. Some of us were more influenced than the others, and among those who suffered most is Eldad because his job is more seasonal than my job and most of us. Because, you know, he depends on the migrating birds. And the migration here is spring and fall, and he lost both of these seasons. And so we will really appreciate your contributions. He doesn't have a PayPal account, so as usual, we will be using Noam's PayPal account, and whatever you contribute will be transferred to Eldad.
I put the information in the chat.
Sorry?
The information is in the chat about.
Yeah, okay. So I believe you have the people information and Steve Plotkin's address. So if you send a check to Steve Plotkin, you just make a little note that this is for Eldad or birds or desert or anything of that kind. So we will be able to identify, you know, whom does it belong to. And more than that, as I said, Eldad is an amazing photographer. And you will have the information how you can order and purchase his photos via the internet. These might be amazing presents for yourself, for others, Hanukkah present, birthday present, Christmas present, whatever, okay? And that's it. And let us now just enjoy his presentation. You're welcome to write your questions, remarks, whatever you want to say on chat. And we will be referring to it later in the end of the presentation. And right now, I apologize, but I'm gonna mute you all. So Eldad, you will be muted as well. So please unmute yourself. All right, you have this little microphone on the left down. All right, so you are muted, and hi Barry, hey Carol.
I just
and that's it. Let's get started. You are muted.
Well, I didn't have to unmute. I'm still on, right? Okay. Okay. Give me a thumbs up because you're muted, and now we're on. So my name is Eldad. I got more introduction than I ever wanted, so you'll judge for yourself. And I want to start with a little story, and then we'll do the other introductions and talk about generalities, and then get into the whole desert journey. One of the earliest explorers and researchers of wildlife and nature in Israel was actually a British reverend, a priest, by the name of Henry Baker Tristram. He's got a fascinating book about traveling in Israel in the around somewhere the 19th century, accompanied by Bedouins on horses. And the research was basically whatever you see that's living, you shoot it, and then you bring it to the mainland for stuffing and for research and for collections and so forth. And since there were no cameras back in those days, they also had like traveling painters with them who recorded the scenery and recorded the wildlife, etc., etc. And this is actually one of those drawings that I got my hands on around 140 years ago. This is where the biblical Sodom lays, very, very close to the southern edge of the Dead Sea. And I just like it very much. It shows our subject for today, the desert, which may look empty and it may look bleak and it may look hostile. And sometimes it even looks kind of nasty and scary in ways. And to me, it is everything but. I mean, the heat can be terrible, and the hikes can be tough, and a lot of technical aspects are really tough in the desert. But to me, it's a love story all the way through. Okay, let's move on. So there's actually, as small as Israel is, there's three separate deserts in our country. Where I live is the outskirts of the Judean Desert, which is also the smallest desert in the world. It's considered by many, definitions can be tricky. And then we got the Negev, which is the part that's attached to central Israel, and it's the largest desert. And then we have the Arava, which is like a valley, a very narrow and low valley that connects the Dead Sea and the Red Sea. And I'll try and focus on each one of them separately a little bit. The Judean Desert is steep, it's dramatic, it's diverse. And this look where you're seeing the cliffs and you're seeing the nothingness and you're seeing the emptiness is it's a big illusion, let's put it that way. Now, before we move on, let's take a nice look at the picture. But I also want to talk about myself with my personal view. Until 6 years ago, I was living in northern Israel, and I was working as a sous chef in a restaurant for a living. I was into nature, of course, and I was into a lot of things, but my reality was very different. And then we got a job offer here in En-Gedi. It was actually my last job as a cook. To be the chef, the executive chef of the lodge, of one of the tourist lodges around here. And I did that for 2 years, and in those 2 years, something very deep happened to me. Part of it is getting my first camera, because I was not doing any photography for some years, but things were just too beautiful. So I got a cheap used camera from some old bird watcher. And then a few months later, some girl, a friend of mine, saw the photos, and she said, well, it's lovely. I have one that's not being used, take it. And then I bought another one. To make a long story short, it's been an obsession, and it's been an addiction, I think, of a positive sort. And so when we talk about the desert and the animals, I also try and bring the perspective of what it's like to photograph these animals and these creatures. About the picture, the feeling of emptiness in the desert is ever present. It is even more prominent around the Dead Sea, on the Judean Desert's eastern border. We have no sunsets here. It's kind of funny, but no sunsets, because we have very steep cliffs all the way on the west of us. So around 4:30 or 5, the sun itself disappears. It's not dark yet, but at least we get the sunrise on the Jordanian Plateau, like you see on this picture. I guess it makes up for it. Okay, now, before I tell you the truth about this creature, about this funny guy, we have some record to settle between us. This creature is called Tristram's starling. named after that same Tristram, that same traveling priest that was traveling in Israel in the 19th century. The only thing I wanted to go back with is that this picture is mine. It's not one of his painters. It's the only lie you will hear in this presentation. I just took this photograph and I tried to smear it and change it and work on it. Most of my photography is not heavily worked on. I try to make you see whatever I'm seeing in the field. But this was just a game. I was thinking about Tristram and those old days, maybe some old books that still exist in a museum, and this is what I came up with. So now back to the present, the Tristram Starling. Sometimes with all the emptiness and the quiet, you hear these really, really loud and bright calls, and this is their flocks. It's a desert specialist. It lives only around deserts in Israel. Sometimes maybe you could see them getting closer to Jerusalem, and they do like human habitats, but it's a desert specialist, very sociable, very cheeky. I've had them steal cookies from my bare hands. I mean, it's bad enough that they come to you when you're camping and then they run around, but they will grab it from your plate and grab it from your hands. Very inquisitive and not so shy of people. This is a juvenile, so even, I don't know if stupid, but he's even more naive. And he came up to the lens to see what was going on. This is the actual size. So on to the Negev. It is, like I said, the largest desert in Israel. Excuse me. Its northern parts are heavily populated. There's a lot of agriculture over there, and many agricultural settlements, kibbutzim and moshavim. I'm sure we all heard about these things. But if you venture south enough in the Negev, you can still find wilderness. You can still find places where the scenery seems endless, both on size and beauty. This is a place called Nachal Cheimar, close to sunset, and it's just the layers of the land on a... We were supposed to count vultures. Vultures in Israel are very heavily threatened. And so they have 3 days a year that they count all the vultures in Israel. They put scouts in every place they might be, and most of them are tagged. Most of them have wing tags. So we were supposed to be counting vultures. There were very few vultures in the scenery, so I could focus on looking at this beauty. The Negev is also the domain of the Arabian wolf. Despite the name, it's not a different species. In fact, every wolf in the world, the gray wolves and the Arctic wolves, they're of the same species. And if we go deeper into biology, they're the same species as our dogs. Your Pinscher or your Rottweiler or your Schnauzer, what have you, it's not biologically separate from these wolves, which is pretty amazing, but we know that they can reproduce together, dogs and wolves. And we have in our deserts even some examples of that, of dog-wolf likes. But being a southern subspecies and a desert creature, they are much smaller than the northern wolves. But in all other aspects, they're very resembling of them. They hunt in packs. They're very smart. They know how to follow prey. They know how to wear down prey. Of course, they know where to steal a free meal if they can. And here in Engedi, they even come in and hunt dogs and cats, believe it or not. Friends of mine just lost a small dog that they really liked. And as a person who is into conservation and a naturalist, you never like to hear about shooting them or poisoning them or doing all these measures. But then again, and I'm not giving any answer, but the question is, when you have a community in the middle of a wild area and there's these animals that cause problems, what do we do? just to make a long story short of how this goes, there was one individual, one wolf that was attacking people. Right at the Masada parking lot, there was this lady with 3 kids stepping out of the car, and it grabbed one of her kids and started to run. So this was a big deal, and you know, when things like that happen, it's all over the news. And that individual was shot. He was not scared of people, and it was seemingly, it had a mind of its own, like many animals do. And it was shot, and since there were no more incidents, and the rest of the wolves in this area seem to be doing fine. Still in the Negev, it has always been a region where large birds of prey dwell and hunt. The Egyptian vulture, this is what you see here in the picture, actually 2 juveniles. It will become white, totally white and black, except for the yellow beak when it's old enough, but right now they're brown. They look a little bit like ghosts to me. The Egyptian vulture no longer breeds in Israel. Or actually, there's been one nest in the past 50 years. It was heavily guarded. I don't know what came out of it. But they're pretty good migrators. They live in the Balkan, you know, in Bulgaria, you could find them. Of course, in Egypt, in Africa, I think in Spain, they got nice populations. So, you know, something in general, when you work with nature, and to me, it's the biggest fight of my life right now. I was a chef, you know, and I was getting applause for the good food. I was also a DJ for many years, where you know, rule the party and everybody likes you. And it's fine, but for my last period of my life, my decision is to fight in any possible front for the nature in Israel. And if you want to do that, you have to be optimistic. Because if you read the surveys, and if you read the reports, and if you follow global warming, and if you follow the extinction countdown, you know, it's pretty discouraging. And obviously, and I'm telling this now to you as well as to anyone I meet, you cannot win a ball game here. You cannot, by yourself, make a huge difference, but you can make a small difference on so many things, on so many opportunities. And that's what you should be doing, because despair and resentment will not take us anywhere. I saw a round thing around its head. I don't know who did that. So yeah, we're hopeful. We have a very, very unique and successful restoration program where wild species are being brought back to their former habitats. It's going quite well with vultures, and there's other raptors as well, like the Egyptian vultures. And I'm hoping to see a nest on the cliffs above En-Gedi in my lifetime. The Arava. Okay, we're moving south. The Arava is the most remote desert in the Holy Land. It's a long and narrow valley which runs from the Dead Sea all the way to the Red Sea. I've said that before. Arid, dusty, and hostile for most of the year. But still, the Arava manages to hide many natural treasures and secrets. I've been birding there sometimes for 3 months on end when doing surveys. I actually lived in Eilat, and the diversity and even the extremity translates into so much beauty. It's just unbelievable. Let's take 2 looks. This is classic Arava. This is a Dorcas Gazelle. Dorcas Gazelle, an African and Arabian Peninsula resident. And Israel is actually the tip of its northern range. I mean, it does not occur north of Israel. And it's also a vulnerable species. I'm sorry, I apologize in advance if this issue of threatened species or extinction. If it And do you hear me? Okay. I got muted for just a second. I don't know why. So this is the Dorcas Gazelle. There should be around 40,000 in the world. And we don't even know how many we have in those. It's a desert species, only on the southern half of Israel. Some say 4,000 still live in the Israeli desert. Some say 2,000. They're not hunted currently, or in general, hunting is not a big issue in Israel, not remotely as in other Middle Eastern countries, and not remotely as in some European countries, which may be very, very cultured and very refined, like the French, but the way they hunt migrating birds, for example, is unbelievable and very, very destructive. So this is the beautiful Dorcas Gazelle. By those curved and relatively long horns, we know that these are two males. Deserts remind me, and probably all of us, of sand. But in our local deserts, it's not always the case. We actually have very few intact and preserved sand dunes. And it's not that there were many before. It's just not the geology and not the topography of Israel. So wherever we do have sands, there are like isolated pockets with each containing a mini ecosystem with its own inhabitants. This is a young juvenile Arabian horned viper. Looks scary. I would not like to get bitten, but it's not the most dangerous creature in the world. And despite the look, the menacing look, it is actually a very docile and cool creature. Specifically, this species, when photographing them, if you meet them at night and you grab a stick and convince them to stop going here, stop going there, and just curl around, the minute they curl around, they're not going to strike, they're not going to run away, and you can lie down 40 centimeters from their head and try and take pictures. Anyone wants to guess how long this creature is, this guy that we're seeing? Leo, you do the.
Yeah, well, I would say maybe 2 meters, about 2 meters.
Yeah, so this is a 30 centimeter individual. This is a baby. He's already quite thick, you know, they're not very long snakes. They hardly reach 1 meter. And they're perfectly deadly and perfectly capable hunters as soon as they come out of the egg. But yeah, this is a baby snake. This is another fascinating sand creature. It's called the Saharan silver ant. And it's holding one world record, which is quite amazing. The fastest ant species in the world. You can see them really only in sand dunes in the southern Arava, the very southern tip of Israel. And their whole adaptation and their whole strategy for living in the desert is quite amazing. Most of the whatever creatures live in these sand dunes are nocturnal. And, you know, it makes perfect sense. They operate at night because, you know, they don't have to deal with this crazy, crazy heat, which could be 45 degrees in the shade easily. And the surface of the sand could be probably 47 to 50 degrees. So you go and do your business at night. You hunt at night and you search for food at night. And then during the day, you're underneath the sand and sheltered at least from the worst part of the heat. But the Saharan silver ant it actually chose the opposite direction. They're extremely well adapted to tolerate heat. Also, one of the best creatures in the world in this very specific field. You can see their colors, this silver lining in the stomach, which reflects a lot of light and heat. They got long legs, so when they're moving, their whole body is uplifted a bit from the sand. So again, they suffer less from heat. And with all these adaptations and all this hardiness of the tiny creature, they can still manage about 10 to 12 minutes of activity in the sand in broad daylight. That is all. I mean, beyond that, the muscles or whatever tissue in their body will just fry up and they'll die. But what they do in these 10 minutes, and that's the brilliancy of this whole thing, is they just look for other heat victims. They search for insects or even other small animals that made the mistake of coming out and died from the heat. So now they don't have to hunt. Their prey doesn't fight back, and it's cooked. So it's just like going down the street to pick up a delivery, with the brown bags, and dinner is served. Amazing, amazing, beautiful creature. Okay. So this is going to be the last little chapter of sand dwellers, because like I said, sand is not your typical Israeli desert. But yes, it is fascinating. So this is the largest spider in the Middle East. It doesn't have a name in English yet, just a Latin name, that the science, where the research describes a new species, they give it a Latin name. So this is called Cerbalus aravensis. Aravensis refers to the location where it dwells. And this is probably the most endemic species that we have in Israel. We don't have real endemic species, almost. But this one only lives in the very southern tip of Israel and Jordan. The Arava is shared. There's the Israeli-Jordanian border runs in the middle of that valley. So a lot of the life forms are the same. We know that conservation on their side is not as great, to say the least. Okay, I'm not going to get into that because that's politics. So it lives in Israel and Jordan. It's about 8 centimeters long. And the coolest thing about it, except for its natural beauty, I know it creeps out some people. I think it's an amazing creature. But the trap it builds is crazy. You know that the spiders have many, many different ways of exploiting their webs. And this guy doesn't need the web for the actual hunt. Just, he digs a burrow in the sand, and the top of the burrow is just a crisscross of his webs with the dirt and sand on top of it. It's always round, very, very meticulous round shape. And when he feels something walking around, then the cover of the burrow opens up like a can, like this. Comes out, snaps, grabs the thing, whatever prey he found, back into the burrow. The thing shuts, and you can never know it was there. It's pretty amazing. I've seen their actual burrows once in my life. I mean, I've seen the spider a little bit more. When you see them, it's probably males who leave the burrow and look for females. Because otherwise, it's not a roaming creature. It doesn't walk around when it's hunting. Like a perfect ambush predator. Okay. So now we're moving back north, all the way back to the southern Dead Sea. And like magic, like poof, even the seasons change. I have to tell you something about winter in the desert. I know in every part of Earth there is significance to the way seasons change, but here in the desert, summer is so long and so oppressive and so dead sometimes and hostile that just seeing rain and clouds and have the temperatures drop a little bit, you would laugh the coldest range of the Judean Desert winter, but it's still not so bad for us. So to me, at least, as a photographer, wintertime is the desert's finest hour. The temperatures drop considerably, and the rains, they're very scattered and few, but the rains and the thunderstorms that we do get really transform the scenery completely. This is a little bit further north, the Judean Desert Plateau, which actually runs from Jerusalem and then from Bethlehem and then from Hebron all the way east to the Dead Sea or even to the Arava. Very different from the Dead Sea, the geology and the wildlife, everything else. And here it looks to me like a winter wonderland, just a few clouds and this whole winter and this whole landscape, which is still dry and thorny and dusty, but it takes a whole different quality. Pretty good example of why I love photographing the desert in the winter so much. By the way, do we have questions that you'd like me to address now, or shall I move on?
Well, Eldad, there was one question I actually answered, but I'm not sure I gave the right answer. So the question was, saying huge ant hills in Africa, could these be related? I answered that I think the hills in Africa are made by termites, but maybe I'm wrong. So
no, you're 100% right. If it's a mound, tall mound, it's a termite mound. Mm-hmm. I don't know of ants with such structures, so I don't think it's related.
Okay. Well, I'm glad to be right. Okay. And then Eldad, in the very beginning, somebody asked us to write the link to your website or Facebook or whatever, so people can purchase photos. So I need you to send me the link.
I'll have it at the end.
You have it in the end. Okay, so I will type it in the end, even though if you can send it to me like WhatsApp or something, so I will place it now on chat. But it's not a big deal. Okay, so that's it, guys. Do we have any further questions now? Yes, Ilana.
There's one other question I saw. Someone asked what happened to the child that the wolf snatched.
Right.
Well,
yes.
The mom just went at the wolf, and he had 2 bites on the near the hip, a few stitches and a shot in tetanus, and thank God there was no rabies. And not actually, it ended up okay, but it was a real scare, and it led to action eventually. Okay, I'm moving on.
Yeah, go for it. Thanks, Ilana. Yes.
I'm Virginia. I have a question, please.
Since we stopped, let's have it. Yeah, great.
Well, what causes the different colors in the sand?
Just different minerals.
Okay. Minerals.
The Judean Desert has got a very rich geology, which unfortunately I'm not so educated on. I mean, I know some of the materials in Israel, but I'm not so sharp with the English terms. There is limestone, and there is what is it called? Jeez. Most of this area was a sea a very long time ago.
Okay. Well, okay, Eldad, let's not make it too complicated.
Okay.
Just a very short basic answer. The different colors are due to different minerals, as you just mentioned. And
yes.
White color or creamy color is basically limestone, which means a lot of oh my gosh, now I'm missing the term. Calcium. Yeah, a lot of calcium. So that's chalk and kirton, which is a very soft limestone, and limestone, but this is basically calcium. And then the reddish color is iron and oxidized iron, and green colors can be copper. Okay, these are different minerals due to the different geological stages of the development of the desert. So all of it is natural. And now, as I'm thinking about it, maybe we need a geology lecture, but that's going to be later. Eldad, we proceed with wildlife.
Yeah, I'd love to hear the geology thing. Fascinating.
I will invite you.
Great.
What white puffs in the front?
The white puffs?
Yeah, in the front here, in the front of the foreground.
It's just bushes, that we call maluach.
Ah, like salt.
It's
Yeah,
salty.
maluach means salty. the
Salt,
salty one.
salt, right.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay.
So after some successful rainy winters, spring on the shores of the Dead Sea becomes an explosion of colors and smells. Seeds that might have been laying dormant for years or even decades seize the opportunity and spring to life. Now, when I talk about successful rainy winters, there's no better winter than the one we had this year. 2019, 2020, it was an exceptional winter. And I'll explain to you how it works because there's a difference. Most of the water in this region, which is, sees very little rainfall, comes from floods. Rains that fall in the Jerusalem mountains, Judean mountains. The water accumulates. The ground is not very receptive of the water, if I can say that. And so it gathers momentum and huge amounts of water spring into the desert. Most of them end up in the Dead Sea anyway. But in the gorges, in the dry riverbeds, a lot of it remains, and that enables plants to grow. So most of this region does not rely on rainfall, since we almost have none. But this year was special. There was rain falling for a few straight days in the Dead Sea, which is unbelievable. And so every time we were driving north to Jerusalem, usually this whole date plantation, between the plantation and the road, is just a brown stretch of land with nothing on it. And this is how it looked this year. The little bluish things, again, I don't know the English name, but it's a plant that I've seen twice in my life, and in both cases I saw one individual. And this year they were by the thousands and tens of thousands, covering miles of the Dead Sea. Just amazing. I call it spring, but it was the end of February, actually. So our spring is relatively around the end of March. None of this remains, except for maybe seeds that will sprout. God knows when. Maybe I won't be around when they do, because rain here that actually falls on this area, something very, very scarce and very rare. This is just another example of the same phenomenon. Richpa. Can you tell us how Richpa is called? Yeah, I've studied the name of the plants and I know them in Hebrew. I can't do it all in English. I love them. I'm just not such a big expert, and I love to photograph them. So this is another look at the northern shores of the Dead Sea in a spectacular and unprecedented year. I hope it returns, but So back to the spring. It's very short here in Israel, especially in the desert. But it's still it's a bountiful time for most desert creatures. There is fresh vegetation and not dry vegetation. And it's also, like most places of the world, it's where new offspring come out to the world for most of the species. The Nubian ibex, this is a male. is enjoying a very welcome fresh greens under the shadow of an acacia tree. You can see how long his horns are. We thought hard about this structure and the way it actually grows and reaches their back. And the only logical thing that we came up with and that we actually saw in the field is it's good for scratching. This guy can scratch his own back. Of course, it's for show off and it's for dominance and the males fight, but you know, these horns, they don't stab with them and they don't cause any serious damage. Just very beautiful and very powerful. Now, I want to elaborate for a minute about this animal. It is not an official national animal in Israel, but it does appear on the sign of the Parks and Nature Authority. And in the few desert oases that we have in Israel, it's very prominent. So everybody knows it. Yael is the Hebrew name. Nubian ibex is the English name. And yes, in En-Gedi, I see them almost every day. They can even sometimes roam inside the settlement. But on a larger perspective, on a global perspective, this is like seeing a panda or like seeing a tiger. I mean, we're looking at one of the rarest large mammals on planet Earth. The estimates for this species run between 2,400 to 4,000. This is what we talk about, what's left of this species. And some of these estimates regard populations in Syria and Jordan, where very few scientists have had the pleasure to come and count them. And we also know Syria has been in a very tough civil war. And what happens in civil wars, there's hunger. And when there's hunger, wildlife gets hunted and eaten. It's just the way of it. It is what it is. And Jordan is more stable, but I don't know. We don't know how many of them exist in these two countries. So around 1,400 that we have in Israel, or 1,600, this is the viable, the protectable, and the one population that can be monitored and preserved for future generations. So it's not an exaggeration. It's like a panda or a tiger, maybe a bit less impressive, but it should be a symbol for the struggle of conservation, nonetheless. So since we are in the Judean Desert, which is completely or almost completely sandless, every creature that lives here needs to be adapted to living between rocks and boulders. Totally different ball game. It's very true about the golden spiny mouse. It's a very cute creature. It's not repulsive at all, like rats, or rats might be sometimes. And it doesn't dig, it doesn't burrow. It finds shelter between cracks and crevices of the rocks. And despite the cute appearance, this is actually a predator. A very specialized predator. It feeds almost entirely on desert snails. And it's also the best way to find these guys because, you know, they're shy and reclusive. But if you find like a whatever shaded den or entrance to a den, and the whole entrance is covered with bits and pieces of cracked shells, then you know this is a golden spiny mouse lair. And so, you know, the Israelis, we eat garinim, sunflower seeds. You know, Israelis, we can't watch a football game without sunflower seeds. It doesn't work. The TV doesn't start. So, like, we eat these things and something is, hold on a second. Excuse me, this is my son's phone. So this is a story of the golden spiny mouse. It eats hundreds, thousands of these snails. And pretty successful creature, I would say. There's plenty of them, although I can bet that people here in Engedi who live here can spend their whole life not without seeing one. But if you go out in the field and look for them, good chance to see them. This is another very, very strange creature of our oasis. And I thought, I don't know, does it creep people out to see insects like this? Because to me, they're still beautiful and fascinating.
Unique.
Yep, unique is a good word. This is called the black cone-headed grasshopper. It certainly doesn't see any grass in its lifetime. And it is the only, not venomous, but poisonous grasshopper that we have in Israel, or that we know of. And the way it actually does this is really, really clever. The plant where it is standing is called the Apple of Sodom, which is it's a bit of a poisonous plant that almost no other creature would like to eat. It's got nothing feeds on this tree except for these grasshoppers, and they feed on maybe 2 or 3 other plants from the same family. And the poison that is inside the tree, inside the leaves mostly, they somehow manage to separate it from the nutrients and move it and store it in 2 small glands underneath their wings. So they don't use it to attack. They're they're herbivores. They eat plants only. They're very slow to move. It's a passive creature. But if somebody tries to eat it, the minute it feels any kind of jaws or beak clamping on it, it secretes this very, very nauseous liquid. And for most predators, that's a good enough sign to back off and not mess with it. You can also see that its colors are the natural warning signs of the world. Black and yellow, like wasps, and like some snakes. So altogether, it's not an appealing meal, and it's got another great defense mechanism. There is one praying mantis that eats these things with pleasure and seems not to suffer any consequences. So it's got some tolerance to this poison, and that's a very, very new research that I only found out about recently. All right, despite the dry conditions and the heat, I find the desert vegetation in Israel surprisingly diverse. And this is one of the most unique plants, in my opinion. Again, I'm not a botanist, but this is called Mary's flower. It has a very unique survival strategy, which for many Christians, it bears resemblance to the prophet's resurrection. And I'll explain. This plant, Mary's plant, we call it also the rose of Jericho. It's not a real rose. Doesn't spread its seeds individually. It actually, they stay on the fruit. This is, in a way, this is what this plant, its own excuse for a fruit. The plants are all inside these little folded branches or branches-like structures. And it can be like this for years. You know, it can look like a dry, crumbled ball of branches lying around in the desert or rolling with the winds. And only when enough rain comes, and then something really amazing happens. This whole thing comes alive, and from a round shape, it spreads. it spreads into like a 20 or 30 centimeter circle. And as it opens, all the seeds are free to hit the ground and grow. So it doesn't let the seeds, just drop them off because, other animals can eat them. Or they can start growing if there's a little bit of moisture and then die. No. It needs to feel the moisture, a lot of moisture, in order to open up and release the seeds. And it's a very, very unique and effective way to protect them until the right time comes. So Mary's flower, I guess the name makes sense, right? You know what? One more anecdote. A friend of mine here in the kibbutz is the only farmer on earth who grows these plants, and they sell quite well to Christian tourists in Israel and over the internet.
He's not the only one, though.
No?
No, there is another one in Vered Yericho.
Really? Okay, so there's two of them.
Well, assuming both survived the pandemic, so there are two of them. Anyhow.
I'll go and burn the place down so I can keep saying he's the only one. So the struggle of life continues everywhere and at all hours. This is called a Sinai fan-fingered gecko, ready to devour an antlion that it just caught. And besides the beauty of the scene, that the antlion is still alive, its eyes are wide open on the last second of its life. But on a personal level, the name reminds me of the beautiful Sinai Desert, which lies only a few kilometers from the tiny settlement where this photo was taken, somewhere in the Negev. And for anyone who is into desert, and it doesn't matter what you do in the desert, if it's hiking or 4x4s or photographing or birding, we have a very big problem with this border issue. I came to the Sinai Desert as a 10-year-old kid, and I fell in love so hard. It was just unreal. I mean, I knew I was going to go back and live there as an adult. And then a few years later, we signed a peace treaty with Egypt, and the Sinai was no longer ours. So we did kind of visit for a few more years. I love the place. In recent years, they're advising us not to go there. The security forces of Israel. They say there's too many terrorists there. It's not safe. But for us, there's the three Israeli deserts, and then lies Sinai. There is, all these species that can appear in 2 of the 4 or in 3 of the 4, and this artificial divide is what can I say? It's painful to this very day. Okay, now we're finally getting to the interesting part of the presentation. No, I'm kidding. But this is the part I like the most because we're getting a little bit into biology and not just the beautiful photographs. The cornerstone of almost every food chain in the desert, at least locally, is the acacia tree. This entire wadi, or dry riverbed, benefits from the presence of this tree. It provides shade, it provides shelter, and of course it provides food for a huge number of living things. And I want to talk about a few of them at least, if it's okay, such as, before them. This is just a photograph that comes to show how no other plants survive in certain areas, but the acacias, they endure. And the reason they can still live in such arid spaces is their roots. Their roots break rock and dig very deep. They reach 10 meters deep into the ground. Imagine 10 meters, where the tree actually is 2 meters, 3 meters tall, 4 meters at the most. So most of its length and most of the action is underneath the ground. And at this depth, there, I guess, enough moisture to keep them alive, even during very hard droughts. So, the acacia tree. The desert babool blue, this is the name of this butterfly, very small butterfly, who made the acacia its host. I mean, it needs the acacia to reproduce. These butterflies lay their eggs on these little leaves, on the stems of the leaves, and their larvae, when they come out, they feed on these fresh green leaves. And so most of its cycle, most of its life cycle, is totally dependent on the acacia tree. Now, in some cases of butterflies, the host provides food for the larvae, but it doesn't have real flowers that the adults can eat. So once the species turns into a butterfly, it flies away to feed on other plants. But the acacia tree, it's got also small but plentiful flowers, and some of these trees, for some reason, bloom in September. September is the height of summer. I mean, if August is the end of summer, in September in Israel, the temperatures are still crazy. There's no rains. So, I mean, the desert's been dry for 4 or 5 months. Nothing is growing. And then all of a sudden, this tree sends forth a great smell, great lemony smell that you can feel in the wind. And it's got all these tiny flowers. And everyone comes to feed on wasps and birds and butterflies and moths and the grasshoppers and bees. Just unbelievable. This is a more random visitor on the acacia tree. This is the rock hyrax. And they, get on the trees for food. They eat a lot of different types of vegetation. So a quick bite, yeah, but also just for a good vantage point. The tree is thorny. Birds of prey cannot attack it from above. Wolves and foxes cannot attack it from the bottom. Probably get some shade as well. So this is the rock hyrax. We have them actually in a lot of places in Israel. And I would dare ask another question just for fun. Somebody would guess which animal is the closest living relative of the rock hyrax. It seems that you know the question. You know, Eliola.
Yeah, I know the answer, so I will not be answering. But what I would like to say is that it is a minute before 10 p.m. So we are running late, and we actually running, towards the end of the presentation. So even though I can sit down here and listen for like forever, but you do have to wrap up the lecture.
I think the answer is the kangaroo.
No, it's a tough question, and the answer is a shocker. Okay, we have no time, so I'm gonna shout it out.
Rabbit or gopher? Wait, rabbit or gopher?
Rabbits and gopher are both rodents, and the rock hyrax is not a rodent, even though it does look like a rodent. And currently, its closest living relative is the elephant. That's how it is. Don't they look alike? Funny. So, do we have time for questions? Do we wrap it up? Because I can also sit here for a while and move on. No problem.
No. Well, if you have somebody like, if you are still having your best photo, your favorite animal, and you did not talk about them, so please, and
Best photo. Wow. This is a graceful premium. This is
the closest living relative is an elephant. Yeah, okay, I just answered. Yeah, so guys, just look at these photos.
This is a favorite, no colors whatsoever, but tons of attitude. It's a black start that I love dearly.
Who is it?
A black start. This is the English name, and this is a fan-tailed raven, also a very, very special creature here in Gedi Oasis. I had all these things to talk about and you know, explain, but we can do it in a few months if anybody is interested.
Okay. There is Lisa wrote that she would like to hear about the bird in the woodpecker family.
Well, we have only one resident woodpecker in Israel. It's certainly not in the desert because it's got no ample trees for it. And that's the Syrian woodpecker. It's a black and white thing with a little red spot on its behind, on its ass. Very common in Israel, but you know, it's the one species. And then a bird that is called wryneck. Wryneck is a very close relative of the woodpecker, but it doesn't really go with this tuk 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 thing. It looks scaly. It looks like a reptile more than a bird. When you look at it, extremely camouflaged, and it doesn't reside here. The wrynecks, they pass from Israel from Asia to Africa via Israel. They're only migrating, and well, I could arrange photos for the next time. I don't have it right here. The last part I was gonna say a few words about bird migration, but maybe really keep it for
next time.
For the next time.
Yep. Yeah.
More questions? That's it? Okay.
Okay. We need the link in order to be able to purchase. Okay, guys, here it is. So, okay. So Eldad, I am. You see it in front of you, and then I will also type it on chat, just to be on the safe side. It's Eldad G66. This is not your age, though.
You can add any questions on the mail. We can figure things out. Hope you have a great day, guys.
Also,
Thank
that's an email, not a website.
Yeah, it is. That's true. But if you send an email, so do you have a website, Eldad?
I currently have just an Airtable site. The link to this one.
Oh, it's not a link. So I'm going to try to type it. Is that a 039A?
33SO39.
Is that an O or a 0?
That's a website.
Eldad, no, there is the beat. Yeah. Is it an O or a 0? Eldad? You're not sure about it.
Website. I'm looking right now.
Are you trying to connect to it?
Well, that's a web address, anyhow.
I know, like.
It looks like a 0.
Yeah, I wrote down a 0 for everyone.
Look at the O in com. It's more round.
It's a 0. It's a 0.
It's a 0. Okay, so that's HTTPS beat LY.
Yeah, I typed it in.
Yeah, I see that. Okay, and then we also have the email. This is unfortunate. Well, okay. Guys, you're welcome to send an email and try to use this address and donate, of course. And Eldad, thank you very much. I enjoyed it. We might have another presentation because I could see that we had quite a few participants, even though we had such a tough competition today. And guys, just before we say goodbye, I would like to invite you all to join me this Thursday. We will have a live Zoom tour at an amazing location, which is hardly known by tourists and even locals, which is called Susita. It's located at the footsteps of the Golan Heights, above Kibbutz and Gedi, overlooking the Sea of Galilee. It's an amazing ancient archaeological site with an amazing story which has to do with the Independence War, and it's just beautiful. So you're welcome to join me on Susita the day after tomorrow.
Eldad, thank you very much.
Thank
you,
you.
guys.
תודה רבה,
Yes.
אלדד.
Enjoy. Have a great day, guys.
Bye. Thanks. Yes, Thursday, 10 a.m.
Thank you, Eldad.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome, guys.
תודה רבה.
Yes.
Come and
ביי.
visit us.
זהו, אתה יכול now you're allowed to
Thank
leave.
you. It was great.
Thank you all. See you at Susita. See you next week. We have great presentations next week. Take care.
Thank you so much. תודה רבה.
תודה רבה, לין.
כל טוב.
כל טוב, להתראות ביום חמישי.
מה זה?
ביי.